They say motherhood never truly ends, but no one warns you what happens when your child grows up and starts treating your love like a debit card with no spending limit. For years, I believed guilt was love. I told myself that if I kept helping, kept paying, kept rescuing, I could fix what went wrong between us. That's what good mothers do, right? We sacrifice. We cover the bills. We keep the peace. But one morning, as I watched my 38-year-old son walk into my house with the same entitled grin, asking for just a little help until next month, something in me snapped. Not in anger. No. It was quieter than that. A kind of hollow silence that told me I had been living in debt, not financially, but emotionally. It didn't start that way. When he first got married, I was overjoyed. I thought I was finally getting a daughter-in-law, a partner for him, and maybe one day, grandchildren to fill my quiet home. I wanted to believe the best of her. She was charming, beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. But soon I realized her light came at someone else's expense. Mine. It began with little things. She'd call and say, "Oh, Mom, you're so good with finances. Could you help us figure out our budget?" And before I knew it, helping with the budget meant covering their rent. Just for a month, of course. Then, when the baby came, I was the one buying diapers, formula, a crib, a stroller, and even paying the hospital bills they'd forgotten about. I told myself it's just money. Money can be replaced. Relationships can't. But the truth? Every check I wrote chipped away a piece of my self-respect. They had a way of making me feel guilty for even questioning it. If I hesitated, my son's wife would sigh and say, "You know, your son's been under a lot of stress. He's doing his best." And then she'd add almost sweetly, "We're family. Family helps family." And I believed her. Maybe it was because I grew up in a time when women didn't say no. When being a good mother meant erasing yourself so others could shine. Maybe it was because I missed my son, the boy who used to bring me flowers from the yard and hug me without asking for anything in return. But guilt is a clever manipulator. It dresses up as love and whispers, "If you stop helping, you'll lose him." So I kept going. When they wanted to upgrade their car, I co-signed the loan. When they couldn't afford their anniversary trip, I gifted them $2,000. When their credit cards were maxed out, I paid them off quietly, telling myself it was for the sake of my grandchildren. But every favor came with a little less gratitude and a little more expectation. They stopped asking if I could help. They just assumed I would. One Christmas, I overheard them talking in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear. His wife laughed and said, "Your mom's practically our safety net. Why stress about the bills when we've got her?" And my son, my own flesh and blood, didn't disagree. He just shrugged. "Yeah, Mom always finds a way." That was the first cut that truly hurt, because in that moment I realized they didn't see me as a mother anymore. They saw me as a bank account with a heart attached. Still, I couldn't stop. Not yet. Because the worst part about guilt isn't what it makes you do. It's how it convinces you you're doing the right thing. They say love blinds you, but I think guilt blinds you worse because it makes every boundary feel like betrayal. The following years were a blur of just one more time, just one more payment, just one more favor, just one more promise that things would get better. And each time I believed them. When they bought their first house, I gave them $15,000 for the down payment. When they remodeled their kitchen, I helped out with another $8,000. When their second car broke down, I lent them $3,500. Money I never saw again. By then I had started dipping into my retirement fund. I told myself I'd make it up later. But the truth was, I was running out of later. Every time I'd express even a sliver of hesitation, my son's wife would turn it into a guilt parade. She'd say, "We thought you wanted to be part of your grandchildren's future." Or, "You raised such a kind man. He just wants to take care of his family. Isn't that what you taught him?" It was emotional blackmail dressed in flattery. And my son, he'd just stand there, quiet, eyes down, letting her do all the talking. The silence was worse than her words, because that silence told me he agreed. I remember one evening vividly. I had gone over to their house for dinner. One of those half-hearted invitations they offered whenever they needed something. The table was set with expensive wine, imported cheese, candles, the kind of luxury I couldn't justify for myself anymore. Halfway through the meal, his wife leaned back and sighed dramatically. "The car insurance is killing us this month," she said. "And with the mortgage, daycare, and groceries, well, you can imagine." I didn't respond. I just stared at my plate, feeling the familiar pressure build behind my eyes. Then my son spoke, almost rehearsed. "Mom, if you could help us out just until I get my bonus." Something in me flinched. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. Exhaustion from being everyone's safety net but my own. That night I went home and opened my checkbook. I flipped through the carbon copies of every check I'd written in the past 5 years. $15,000 here. $8,000 there. $3,500. Well, or $200. $600. $450. $2,000. $9,800. By the time I reached the end, the total made my hands shake. $68,575. $68,575. I sat there at my kitchen table surrounded by proof of my own foolishness. And yet, instead of feeling angry, I felt embarrassed. How could I let it go this far? I used to be careful. I used to know how to save, how to plan. But somewhere along the way, I traded financial logic for emotional hope. I convinced myself I was buying love. And guilt. Guilt was the currency that kept the transaction going. There were days I wanted to say no. Days I'd pick up the phone, see their names flash on the screen, and let it ring until voicemail took it. But then I'd imagine my son's disappointed voice, or my grandchildren asking, "Why doesn't Grandma help anymore?" And I'd cave all over again. The worst part was, I started lying to my friends. When they'd ask about my retirement, I'd smile and say, "Oh, I'm doing fine." I wasn't fine. I had credit card debt for the first time in my life. I'd stopped buying myself little treats. No more lunches with friends, no new clothes, no vacations. Even my car needed new tires. But I told myself I'd wait another few months, because somehow, in my mind, my comfort mattered less than their convenience. And then, one afternoon, it all came crashing together. My son called. Not his wife this time. Him. He sounded stressed, rushed, desperate. "Mom," he said, "we're behind on the mortgage. Can you transfer $5,000 today? It's just temporary." Temporary. That word again. Temporary had become permanent, and permanent had become my prison. I didn't answer right away. My silence must have startled him. "Mom?" he said. "You there?" I finally whispered. "Yes, I'm here." But I wasn't. Not really. Part of me had already left. The part that believed this was love. That night, after my son's call, I sat in the dark for a long time. No television, no sound. just the ticking of the clock echoing through my living room. Each tick felt like another reminder of how long I'd been waiting for something that was never coming. Gratitude. I opened my laptop to check my bank account, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could stretch things one last time. But when I saw the balance, my stomach dropped. It wasn't the familiar, comfortable cushion I'd always kept. No, the number staring back at me was shockingly low. Somehow, between the temporary loans, the emergency transfers, and the "it's just until next month" requests, I had drained nearly $70,000 from my savings. And worse, my retirement account had barely enough left for the next few years. It hit me like a slap. I had become my own child's enabler. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every conversation, every guilt trip, every thank you that sounded more like a receipt than appreciation. I remembered the day I retired. How proud I was when I signed the papers. How I'd imagined quiet mornings, garden walks, coffee with friends. But instead, my retirement had turned into an open account for their mistakes. The next morning, I drove to the grocery store. I wasn't even planning to buy much. Just bread, eggs, and milk. But when I tried to pay, my card was declined. I laughed awkwardly, assuming it was some glitch, but deep down, I knew the truth. I went home, logged in again, and stared at the transfers to my son, payments to their mortgage company, purchases I didn't make, but that I'd gifted in the name of love. It was all there, every dollar, every decision, mocking me. And then I saw it, an email from my financial advisor, one I'd ignored for weeks. Reminder, please schedule your annual retirement review. My throat tightened, because the truth was, there wasn't much to review anymore. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The sunlight fell across the quilt my mother had made me decades ago. A reminder of another woman who gave and gave until there was nothing left to give. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I whispered to the empty room, "What am I doing? Was this love? Was this motherhood? Or was it just guilt in disguise? A lifelong debt I never owed?" I picked up the framed photo of my son as a little boy. His cheeks were round, his smile wide, his arms wrapped around my neck. That was the boy I loved, not the man who treated me like a bank. And that's when it happened. The shift. The quiet, devastating clarity that changed everything. I realized I had been living my entire adult life for everyone but myself. For my son. For his wife. For appearances. For peace. For guilt. But never for me. That night I didn't cry. I didn't rage or call him or make a scene. I simply wrote 4 words on a notepad and placed it beside my computer. The bank of Mom is closed. And for the first time in years I felt something resembling peace, not the warm kind, not yet, but the kind that comes when you stop lying to yourself. I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the silence settle. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also freeing because I knew what I had to do next. The next morning I woke up before the sun. It had been years since I'd seen dawn like that. Quiet, pale gold light filtering through my curtains. A reminder that new beginnings rarely announce themselves with fanfare. I made my coffee, sat at the table, and looked at the note I'd written the night before. The bank of Mom is closed. 4 simple words, but they felt like a revolution. I stared at them for a long time, letting them sink in. Then I picked up the phone and dialed my son. He answered on the second ring, cheerful as always, like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom. I was just going to call you back. Did you get a chance to transfer that money yesterday?" Took a deep breath. My voice came out calm. Almost too calm. "No, I didn't." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, okay. Did you have trouble with your account? I can text you the bank info again." "No," I said softly, interrupting him. "You don't need to send it, because I'm not transferring anything anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Then he laughed, awkwardly. "What do you mean, Mom?" I looked out the window, watching the morning light stretch across my yard. "I mean," I said, "the bank of Mom is closed. Permanently." He chuckled, again. But the humor didn't reach his voice this time. "Come on, Mom. Don't say that. You know we're just going through a rough patch." "You've been in a rough patch for 8 years," I replied, still calm. "And I've been the one patching it up every single time." His tone hardened. "You make it sound like we're using you." "Because you are," I said quietly. "Maybe not intentionally at first, but it became a habit. You stopped trying to fix things because I kept fixing them for you." There was a sharp inhale on his end. Then faintly I heard her, his wife, in the background. "Is that your mother? Tell her this isn't a good time for ultimatums. We have bills due." That was all it took. All the years of quiet humiliation, of forced gratitude, of guilt. It rose in me like a wave. But I didn't let it drown me this time. I simply said, "I've loved you more than I've ever loved anyone. But love isn't supposed to bankrupt you." He was silent. I could hear him breathing, heavy and uneven. Finally he muttered, "So that's it? You're just cutting us off?" "I'm not cutting you off," I said softly. "I'm setting you free. You're 38 years old. You have a job, a family, a home. It's time to live your own life. And it's time I start living mine." Then, before guilt could creep back in, I ended the call. My hand trembled as I placed the phone down. For a second, the old reflex kicked in. The voice that said, "You were too harsh. Call him back. Apologize." But I didn't. Instead, I stood up, walked to the mirror, and said out loud, "You did the right thing." It felt strange at first, talking to myself like that. But after everything I'd been through, I realized I was long overdue for a conversation with the only person I'd ignored. Me. Over the next few days, the calls started coming. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. "Mom, can we talk? Please, this isn't like you. Why are you doing this to us?" And then, from her, "This is really unfair. We're family." But I didn't answer, not one. I deleted every message, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Because for once I wasn't interested in being the hero of someone else's story. I wanted to be the main character of my own. In the quiet that followed, I realized how different my house felt. No more constant buzzing of the phone. No more emotional panic every time I opened my banking app, just silence. And in that silence, a kind of power began to grow. That was my awakening. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat. It was the sound of a woman finally remembering that she existed outside of her son's needs. When Grandma's lawyer arrived, everyone fell silent. He placed a thick folder on the table. "This," he said calmly, "is the updated will." Amy's eyes widened. "Mom, what did you do?" Grandma's voice was steady, no longer shaking. "I protected myself, Amy, and I protected what's left of this family's dignity." Amy tried to interrupt, but Grandma continued. "You and your husband have drained my savings. disrespected my home and taken advantage of my love. That ends today." The lawyer handed her an envelope. "In here are the papers you signed. Every transfer, every loan you claimed was temporary. It's all documented. You will leave this house by the end of the week." Amy stood up, her face red. "You can't do this. I'm your daughter." Grandma took a deep breath. "I can, and I must, because I finally remembered who I was before I became everyone's safety net." The lawyer nodded respectfully, and for the first time in years, Grandma stood taller than the chaos that had surrounded her. The house is quiet again, not the kind of silence that hurts, but the kind that heals. Grandma sits by the window with her cup of tea, watching the sunlight dance across the floor. For the first time in over a decade, she can hear the birds outside instead of arguments inside. It wasn't easy. The loneliness that followed was sharp, like the echo of a slammed door. But peace, she realized, often arrives disguised as emptiness. Amy hasn't called in months. Sometimes Grandma stares at her phone, wondering if she should be the one to reach out. Then she remembers the words her lawyer told her that day. Sometimes love means letting people face the storm they created. She smiles faintly. The garden is blooming again, not just the flowers, but Grandma herself. And though her family may never understand the strength it took, she knows she made the right choice. Because this time, the home she opened her heart to is her own.